You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 117 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. And for the first month of the year, we will be featuring a first step presentation. And this will be featuring Don J., who we recorded at the noon Zoom room earlier this January. And I remember getting an email from Don in September when he first joined the groups and was asking about various ways to play the podcast in order. And I showed him the YouTube playlist that has all of the episodes in order and various other ways of finding the podcast. So a lot of people are finding the podcast through YouTube. And if they find one episode, it's kind of hard to find where the next episode is. So we do have a special playlist on the Bay Area SAA YouTube channel that has all of them in order. Before getting to the reading this week, I did want to talk about a few episodes of the podcast. The first being episode 74 is no longer available. I will probably repost this episode. We're having issues with the anonymity, trying to keep our guest name anonymous. And the only way I could really do that was to delete the episode. And so I will probably repost that one in the future. I've re-edited the wording and everything to keep it just to the first initial, but hopefully we'll have that episode up and available again. And I've been talking a lot about the Bay Area SAA retreat coming up in March. And there were a few episodes of the podcast that I wanted to highlight. The first being episode 82, Return of the Bay Area Retreat. And this is where I had my friends Tim and Paul on to talk about their experiences at the retreat. We also had Paul's wife, Amy, who is a member of COSA and has been on the podcast before, to talk about her experiences about what it's like for a partner to let someone go away for a weekend retreat. So if you're interested in finding out more about the retreat, please check out episode 82. And also, while I was at the retreat last year, I did a workshop and I recorded that for an episode, and that is episode 89, the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast Workshop. And then finally, episode 90, Women's Experiences at the Retreat. And we had a few women join me in conversation about what it was like for them to be at the retreat. And it was a fantastic conversation. So since I am the outreach coordinator for the retreat committee, I'm trying to let people know where they can find out more information about the retreat besides the Bay Area SAA website. So those are some resources, episodes 82, 89, and 90. And after Don's first step, I'll be sharing a little bit more information and trying to keep the outro very short this week. I'm going to be out of town for about a week and wanted to make sure that I got this episode posted. So for the reading this week, I chose the first few paragraphs from chapter 3 in the AA Big Book, more about alcoholism. And on the Joe and Charlie episodes of the podcast focusing on step 2, I had mentioned that I'm going to be skipping over chapter 3, more about alcoholism, because it does mostly involve powerlessness and unmanageability around the first step. And a lot of it has to do with alcohol rather than a universal idea of addictive behaviors. Joe and Charlie's coverage of that definitely delves into alcohol and the process of drinking. But yeah, someone chose this reading a few days ago at our noon groups, and I thought it would be a perfect way to introduce a first step. And this can be found on page 30 of the Big Book. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it to the gates of insanity or death. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. And this chapter has 3 different examples of powerlessness and unmanageability around drinking. However, there was one that I did want to highlight here, talking about the jaywalker. And this can be found at the bottom of page 37, continuing on to 38. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he is slightly injured several times in succession. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he is hit again, and this time he has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley breaks his arm. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work, his wife gets a divorce, and he is held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit that if we substituted alcoholism and, in our case, sex addiction, for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, we had been strangely insane. It's a strong language, but isn't it true? Yeah, that example just shows how crazy some of our thoughts can be while we're acting out. And for the way that we document our examples of powerlessness and unmanageability in our first step, often presented at a group. So Don had finished writing his first step and had scheduled a date at the noon group. He sent me an email asking how it can be recorded for the podcast. And so, I coordinated with our meeting secretary and said that I was okay recording it. And as long as he was interested, we were good to go. And so now, without further ado, I am now ready to turn it over to Don J. presenting his first step at the noon group. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it.
Don, you are about to share with us your first step. We acknowledge and affirm your courage in taking this step. We want to clarify some things about this experience for each of us. The primary purpose for you giving this formal first step presentation is to aid you in your program of recovery. It need not be done to please the group or to gain status. There is no right or wrong way to give a first step. Any effort you make is legitimate. Here are some suggestions which others who have gone before you have found helpful. We encourage you to be specific about your behaviors and to speak from your heart in order for you to be in touch with the pain and reality of your addiction. Try not to bury yourself in shame. Let us hear you, not your addict, speaking. The group has a responsibility to be loving, caring, and accepting of you. The members will avoid judging you, giving advice to you, or taking care of you. If you wish, you may request that no one interrupt you during your presentation. However, several members have affirmed that on reflection, such interruptions have helped to guide them and to make the first step experience more meaningful. If you wish, we will let you know when 5 minutes of your meeting time remains. This will allow you to take a few minutes to complete your presentation and also allow time for members to give you feedback about what it was like to share your first step with you. Remember, we are here for you. May God grant you serenity. Floor is yours, Don.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jason, Tim D, and everybody here. My name is Don. I'm a sex addict. This is my story. First time I remember having any kind of sexual feeling when I was about 8 years old. I figured out that I could lie face down in my bed and wiggle back and forth, causing a very pleasurable sensation. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I liked it and continued with this ritual as often as I could. When I was 11 years old, I found some Playboy magazines stashed under the mattress of the family camper, which is where I saw for the first time the nude body of a full-grown woman. It took my breath away. After thumbing through the magazine, studying each and every photo in detail, I immediately laid the magazine down on the floor of the camper, opened up to the centerfold, laid down on top of it, imagining I was having sex with the woman in the photo. I frantically started wiggling away and orgasmed in my pants. The thought of possibly getting caught only enhanced the act. It was the most pleasurable experience I had ever felt in my life and was the birth of my fantasizing. I put the magazine back exactly as I found it and left the camper. This was the beginning of my visits to the camper multiple times per week for years to come. I became so obsessed with the euphoric feeling that fantasizing and masturbating provided, I was looking for any other way to get that feeling again. At 13 years old, the end of my 7th grade year, 2 of my neighbor friends and I had a sleepover out in his yard where I had my first homosexual experience. It was very stimulating, but I was embarrassed and ashamed afterward, and none of us ever talked about it again. For the next few weeks into the summer, my friend and I would get together at his house and masturbate in his room. Again, the thought of getting caught only heightened the experience. During those few weeks into the summer, we eventually were able to talk his 14-year-old sister into watching us masturbate, and that added a lot of excitement. It didn't take very long after having his sister watch us for me to decide that that just wasn't enough, and I wanted more. A few weeks later, I abandoned my friend and was able to talk his sister into meeting just me so we could explore each other's bodies. We met several times in an old house on our property that my dad used for storing his business equipment and supplies. This is when and where I had my first experience seeing and touching the fully developed body of a female. It was better than viewing photos in magazines or fantasizing. We never actually had sex, however, I did lay on top of her and wiggled around until I orgasmed. This all ended in the fall when we had to go back to school, but I would remember everything about our encounters and would fantasize about her and masturbate whenever I felt the urge. All the while, I'm still frequenting the camper every chance I get. As I'm writing this and looking back, it appears that my powerlessness was progressing toward out of control. My sexual addiction was constantly running in overdrive, although I had no idea what was happening to me at the time. I'm now around 14 years old, and my 17-year-old stepsister moves in with us. I began obsessing and fantasizing about her all the time and would go to my room to masturbate. Soon that wouldn't be enough. So when I was home alone, I would go into her room, put on her panties and bra that she left lying on her floor, then climb into her bed and masturbate. I would visit her room and undergarments for the next year until she moved out on her own. Quite often, her girlfriends would come over to visit or spend the night. I couldn't help myself obsessing and fantasizing about them, which would cause some major arousal. When that happened, I just had to go to my room and masturbate. Throughout my middle school and high school years, I continued to obsess and fantasize and masturbate about every good-looking female, whether from school, from the beach, at the store, or walking down the sidewalk. It didn't really matter where I saw them. I was powerless, and I just had to do it. And don't forget, I'm still frequenting the family camper every chance I get to view my dad's porn magazines and masturbate. I used girls as objects for my own selfish pleasure. In high school, when I had girlfriends, I would obsess about their friends, only to break up with them and seek out sex with the friend. I would continue this ritual repeatedly throughout my teen and young adult years. Now out of high school, I was splitting rent in a house with my best friend from 5th grade. I had a job in construction, and he had a job as an electrician. We would go out on the weekends, drinking, smoking weed, snorting cocaine, looking for sex, and that weekend's party locations. I would meet girls at the parties or at the local disco in hopes of having sex. Quite often, he would take off with some girl, and I'd take off with one of them on my own. Sometimes I would have sex with them and move on and never see them again. I would even stop seeing a girl if we didn't have sex by the second or third date. Once I spent the night in a hotel with my little sister's friend who was 17 years old. I was 19. I never saw her again. I felt a great sense of remorse and shame after this one because I had known her for years as a friend, but that didn't prevent me from inflicting some kind of mental or emotional pain upon her with my obsessive compulsive behavior. She was so angry and hurt that she drove her car across the front yard where I was living and did what we called back in the day a lawn job. I had to lie to our landlord, making up a story about what had happened. Now I'm 21 years old and have a baby on the way with my girlfriend of 3+ years. I was constantly mentally preoccupied somewhere in fantasy land and escaping reality and life's responsibilities, like going to Lamaze classes or any other parenting class she had signed us up for. It wouldn't take long before I started feeling the urge to act out. I would find some reason to start a fight with her so I could walk out the door for the evening or for a couple days and go looking for sex with any girl that would. I eventually went home. However, this behavior would go on for the next 12 years that we were together. On December 7th, 1980, my first daughter was born. I was temporarily split up with my girlfriend, living by myself in a basement apartment in one of my parents' rentals. The day before she was born, a coworker friend and I hit the local watering hole after work because we worked really hard and deserved to go have drinks. At about 11:30 p.m. that evening, I woke to someone yelling and banging on my front door. I was still in my work clothes and boots, passed out on the bed, and had no idea how I got there. To this day, I still don't know. I believe it was my ex-sister-in-law who was at my door and took me to the hospital where my girlfriend was in labor. I don't remember most of my daughter's birth other than cutting the cord and holding her, and that's even pretty vague. The next day, I decided to celebrate with a couple drinks and a little weed. I'm an alcoholic, so a couple drinks always turned into many drinks, along with whatever other illegal substances I could get my hands on or whatever my friends had. If it numbed me, I would smoke it, snort it, eat it, or drink it. In most cases, I would also get out the magazines that I had collected and masturbate. This was almost a daily ritual. Later, I went to the hospital to visit my newborn daughter and her mother. Again, I don't remember most of the day other than John Lennon being shot and bringing them home to live in the basement apartment with me. My life was unmanageable and out of control. At 24 years old, I had the opportunity to go to Alaska for construction work. It was a 6-week job. However, I found more work and moved my daughter and girlfriend up 9 months later. During those 9 months, and for the next 3 years, I would continue to drink heavily, smoke weed, masturbate multiple times a week, and seek out sex with anyone that I could, ignoring all responsibilities to my girlfriend and daughter. In 1986, I'm 28 years old, and I have a 5-year-old and one on the way again. My girlfriend of 8 years is the mother of my children, and we are not yet married. I have cheated on her multiple times during those 8 years, but she never knew it. I am working an office building construction project in the city when a woman starts stalking me, showing interest. She leaves notes and little trinkets on my truck, which causes me to start wondering who she is and imagine that maybe she wants sex. We finally meet one day when she was waiting at my truck, and we made arrangements to meet later in the week. I picked her up after work at the house where she lived, and we proceeded to head straight to the liquor store. I purchased some liquor, and we headed out the road where we proceeded to party, drinking, smoking weed, and engaging in lots of sex. In the truck, out of the truck, on the truck. This went on for months. I would pick her up, and we'd go anywhere we could to have sex. Sometimes we would go to the building I was working in to have sex in the offices. I would do this after work, so I would lie to my girlfriend about being somewhere else or working late, again, ignoring my responsibilities to my family for my own selfish pleasure. The woman I was meeting had a run-in with the law and had to do some time in the local correctional facility on the weekends. On Friday evenings after partying and having sex, I would drop her off just before midnight to begin her weekend stay. By Monday evening, we were meeting again. Our encounters usually involved my truck, but now she started taking me to houses, trailer parks, hotel rooms, apartments where we can engage in sex. Every time I saw her, I just couldn't say no. I was powerless to my addiction. I even tried to have sex with one of her friends. I consistently put myself in danger, risking disease, engaging in unprotected sex, possible assault, or worse, because I had no idea whose home I was in, nor whose bed I was using. Total time in this affair was almost 2 years. After that, I continued to be an addict on the hunt for sex with just about anyone, just about anywhere. My life was out of control and unmanageable. My second daughter was born during that 2 year period, and I was proud to say that I was a father and had 2 children. My girlfriend and I get married. However, I was not happy in the relationship. We had nothing in common, and we weren't working towards the same goals. My job was demanding, consuming a lot of my time, and stress of the demands my family required caused me to become depressed, so I would drink and smoke weed daily. Then the addict in me would emerge needing that dopamine fix, so I would get out the magazines I had stashed at home or at work and masturbate. Anytime I was out of the house, I was always on the hunt, lusting for sex. I was not accepting the responsibilities of a good father or husband. Looking back on things, I blamed my unhappiness on her when in reality, I was not happy with myself. I moved out, and the 14-year relationship ended in divorce. July 1992, 6 months after my divorce was final, I meet and start dating my current wife. She is all I can think of. All the time, everywhere. She's my obsession. Sex between us is awesome. I get some relief from my addiction. I had stopped viewing porn, magazines, and masturbating for the next 13 years. July 1994, we get married and blend our 2 families with my 2 daughters, 11 years old and 5 years old, and her 2 daughters, 10 years old and 7 years old. We raised the 4 girls. They all graduated from high school and moved out one by one. We had purchased and sold 4 homes and 1 property during that time frame. I had no thoughts or threats of acting out between 1992 and 2004. My thoughts and attention were always directed toward my wife. She was all I could think of and all I ever wanted. Then 2005 comes along, and my addiction resurfaces. I am sent to Eagle River, Alaska for 6 weeks as project director for an office renovation project. My hotel was in Anchorage, in an area where prostitutes were frequently seen. I would look out my window to watch them go by and began to fantasize what it might be like to have sex with them. I never acted upon those thoughts, but I used them to feed my returning addiction and then would masturbate to internet pornography. During my stay at the hotel in Anchorage is when I first began viewing internet porn, which was on a state-issued laptop computer. I didn't think about potential consequences, nor did I care at the time. Upon my return to Juneau 6 weeks later, I realized that the laptop could get me into some really big trouble at some point in the future if I didn't do something about it now. In an attempt to control and manipulate things, just as an addict does, I contacted a friend in IT who took care of the problem for me. I also realized that my addiction had returned to Juneau with me as well. I would objectify and obsess about women I worked with in the office buildings and would fantasize about having sex with them and masturbate in the nearest men's restroom. I would also view internet pornography on my phone and masturbate at work. I also began viewing internet pornography at home and masturbating there. These are a couple examples of my powerlessness and my life becoming unmanageable and out of control again. My objectifying, obsessing, fantasizing, and masturbating would continue in a downward spiral, only getting worse. I was masturbating about 3 or more times a week between home and work. My wife suspected something has been going on for a number of reasons for years, but I'm a veteran liar, gaslighter, and manipulator, so she can't prove a thing. In February 2013, one of my employees takes an interest in me and wants to meet in one of the offices. So the addict that I am agrees to meet with her in an office for sex, which sets off a 6-week extramarital affair. After sex, I would tell her that I can't do this anymore. I love my wife and she doesn't deserve it. Then I would leave to go home to my wife and feel guilt and shame for what I had just done and swear to myself that I would never do it again. But then a couple of days would go by and I would start thinking about our sexual encounter, remembering how it made me feel. Then I would become aroused and the cycle would start all over again. I would masturbate at work or at home until we could meet the following week in a different office. We met in multiple offices for sex for 6 weeks until I ended the affair. Again, powerless, out of control, and unmanageable. 2013, I retire, but my wife still works, so I have ample opportunity to act out during the day. From 2013 to 2023, I continue to view internet porn on my home computer, iPad, or iPhone, and masturbate not less than 2 times per week, but not more than 3 times per week. I continue to objectify, obsess, and fantasize about women that I see, that I know, or that I meet, and masturbate where I can. My wife eventually figures out what I've been doing with my devices and with myself and confronts me. Busted. April 11th of this year, I tell my wife everything, including my 10-year secret of the affair. She was devastated. I felt the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders as I unloaded it onto hers. We began individual therapy with CSATs within weeks and are still seeing them today. My therapist turned me off the link for the noon 12-step at 12 Zoom meeting. I sat on the information for about 3 weeks before I had the balls to admit I had a problem and that I had just shoved my wife into the deepest, darkest hole she's ever been in her life. She's trusted me with her heart for 32 years, and I smashed it to pieces. Now 8 months have passed. I can still feel and see the pain she's carrying from the ultimate betrayal. What am I doing about it? I see my therapist once a week. I read and work in the Facing the Shadow workbook. I see a coach once a week, and I attend this Zoom meeting every day that I can. We also attend another SAA. Oh, I also attend another SAA meeting on Wednesday evenings. I have a sponsor who helped me with this first step. We meet at least once a week, and I hope he sticks around long enough to guide me through the next 11 steps. Wife and I attend a COSA meeting once a week when we can. I reach out to SAA brothers a couple times a month, and I'm always looking for additional tools and resources to put in my toolbox of recovery. I feel I'm working my ass off to be so active in my recovery. When it comes to experiencing negative consequences that have affected my education due to my compulsive sexual activity, I recall how distracted I was with smoking weed, obsessing and objectifying girls at school, then go home and masturbate. When I was obsessing and objectifying in class, I wasn't paying attention to the teacher or anything I should have. When I was at home fantasizing about those girls and masturbating, I wasn't doing my homework and didn't have anything to turn the next day, which caused me to get failing grade. When it came to my career, it didn't prevent or hinder my rise up the success ladder, but it did cause me to become distracted enough during the day that I would get behind in some of my work tasks, causing me to stay late, take work home, or arrive early the next day to make up the time to complete the work. My physical health was affected in the sense that I became stressed, depressed, lack of sleep. My liver was being chewed up by my drinking, and my lungs were getting tarred up like an asphalt highway. All these things I never thought of until the writing of this first step. I was a good magician, though, being able to hide my secret double life from most of my family and friends. However, I'm sure my obsessive, compulsive, addictive behavior had some effect on my children when I wasn't accepting the responsibilities of a father. How could it not have? Financially, in the past, I spent money on booze, weed, gasoline, and on magazines or a few movie rentals. Today, it is costing us with STD testing, CSATs, coaches, polygraphs, all kinds of donations and literature purchases. I never paid for sex or anything on the internet or anything else directly related to sex. I didn't think about my addiction hurting my spirituality, as I felt none anyway, but now I can see that it was numbing me to the point I was blind to all things, feelings, emotions, and quite possibly my spirituality. The biggest negative effects due to my compulsive sexual activity were on my relationship with my wife, my self-esteem, my integrity, my morals, and my values. If there are any positives to take away from all that has happened, I would list them like this. 1, I have been forced to take a deep, long, hard look into my soul and myself in the mirror. Not impressed with what I found or saw, I had to make a conscious decision to be a better human, starting by admitting my faults to everyone, God, and myself. 2, through therapy, I have a better understanding of how I got this way, who I am, and how I ended up here. 3, I'm learning about true emotions, feelings, intimacy, and spirituality. 4, I have been led to the noon 12-step at 12 Zoom meeting where I have found others like me who accept me for who I am and what I am. 5, I have been led back to a spiritual relationship with my higher power. My name is Don, and I'm a sex addict.
Thank you, Don, for your courageous first step presentation. The meeting is now open for discussion. At this time, we will take responses, affirmations, and reactions to the first step. We will start the shares with Don's sponsor, Tim.
Thank you, Don. Great job. Thank you for your rigorous honesty and for your bravery, for just putting your heart out there and bearing it all for us. I hope that you can feel a sense of relief knowing that you're now living in the light. You don't have to live in the shadows. And I know I can certainly relate to your pain and grief of hurting people that we love because of this addiction. But you're now on the right path. And as your sponsor, I know that you've been nothing but committed and unwavering and just so much willingness to really look at your life with a new perspective and living more authentically now. So you're doing great work and you did a really great job today. Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Tim. If you would wish to affirm Don in his first step, please use the Zoom raise hand feature that can be found by selecting the reactions button. Please be mindful and keep your shares to 1 minute. If we can get a timer to time 1 minute, thank you. We'll start with David P.
Thank you so much. Hey, good brother, good brother. I'm really grateful to be with you today, and I'm so proud of you to see you taking this first step with such rigorous honesty. I heard the insanity, the powerlessness, and the unmanageability that is so common to all of our addictions. Today, though, is about your liberation as you let go of all that crap in your addiction. Keep working with Tim and move on through those steps. It works if you work it, and your step today is evidence of your work. You are loved, good brother.
Andrew N.
Hey, Don. Just want to say thank you, brother. Hearing your story, you could hear the diligence and the person that's come out that, you've moved past being that addict. And it's amazing being able to hear your story, brother. And coming to this room when I came back in August, you were truly one of the first people that I met here. You've saved me in some really dark times, and I'm proud of you, brother. So be kind to yourself today. I love you, and keep it up.
Oh, man. Such a powerful first step. Like all first steps, it is an amazing gift, not only for the presenter, but for other people that witness that. It's a good reminder for the insanity of addiction, and especially to be able to share that here on the podcast for other listeners to be able to hear. So many, many thanks, Don, for that. Thank you so much. So I had originally hoped to read some more emails and share some more music, but I do want to publish this episode as soon as possible. I was feeling a little bit under the weather over the weekend when I was hoping to have it out, but feeling okay now and getting it together. Other things keeping me busy are intergroup projects and especially the upcoming retreat, and I am on the committee for that. I'm going out to various meetings that I don't usually attend, sharing information about the retreat. And for anyone here in the Bay Area, please pass the word on that registration is now open. There are a couple of links on the website, one looking for other volunteers for our committee, and the other is the registration for the retreat. And we also have a link for workshop presentations. So if you do want to present a workshop at the retreat, there is a link there for submitting a workshop proposal. Like I had mentioned at the beginning of this recording, episode 89 featured my workshop that I presented last year. And I may be inclined to do another workshop this year, perhaps centering on music and recovery. I haven't done one of those workshops in a few years. So I will be putting links for retreat information into the show notes for this episode. I have started scheduling new guests for recordings, and I'm happy to say one of them that I'm still working on has been a past guest of the SAA and COSA speaker meeting, and it would be nice to record a conversation rather than just the recording from the SAA and COSA speaker meeting. So details on that will be coming up shortly. But, thinking of that, our quarterly SAA and COSA speaker meeting will be on February 4th at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, and I will be posting links for that on the Bay Area SAA website. And so we will have a few recordings coming from that. And we did also record an Experience, Strength, and Hope share at the noon meeting. And as was mentioned before, we'll be doing another Joe and Charlie episode. This time we'll be moving over chapter 3, which is more about alcoholism, and moving to chapter 4, We Agnostics. So lots of episodes coming up in the future. Like I said, the retreat committee is keeping me busy at this time of year. Anyway, if you did have any feedback for the podcast that you want me to read, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. If you wanted to get a hold of me personally, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And I'd be happy to get back to you. Like I said, I am just getting around to scheduling a lot of the requests that we've had to be guests on the podcast. So please be patient with me for those that have asked. And I will be getting to those very, very soon. So with that, I'm going to close out this episode. And I am super grateful for you tuning into this one. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.